Hi.
Hello.
So I'm Marsha McAdam. I'm a physical and mental health advocate, and I'm on the Be Well project group, and so it's nice to meet with you today. Tell me who you are and
Okay, well, I don't know whether I can describe myself as easily, but I'm Peter Fonagy, and I'm a mental health professional who is also a university professor at University College London. And there I am at the moment. And I'm really pleased to be part of this because Be Well could be such an important way that we could help all of us be just a little bit, just a tiny bit better, which is kind of big enough to me. Okay, so being well in a time that it's really hard to be well. Marsha, last 18 months, what were the three most difficult things about the last 18 months? It was difficult for everyone, all of us. Tell me about the three most difficult things.
for me, it was not knowing who was going to come through the door each day because I have carers, domiciliary carers. But luckily, I had a robust package of social care at the time. But it was also worrying whether they were coming through the door and whether they would have, COVID and they would pass it on and everything.
That sounds really scary. Yeah.
It was, but I was also really conscious of if I was going to do something, whether, go out food shopping or that, whether I could then also pass it on to them. And but they were godsends. I call them my fairy godmothers. And the second one was, I've spoke about it before. It felt like a really rubbish Saturday afternoon movie, with the end of the world, and I used to watch all these really naff movies, and sort of when I was ill mentally myself, when I was in a bad place, I used to think, right, I'm going to go and get a camp stove, that type of thing, and it took me. When COVID first happened, it took me to that place, a bit about not knowing, when there was like no toilet rolls, and it was scary. So there was that, and
Is
then
it kind of scary? Let me just understand. It was scary about the terrible things that it could just get really terrible, and you would be without any resources, and you would be alone and isolated, or kind of end of the world. It sounds like a kind of end of the world scary.
it was, but then at the same time, I was thinking, am I catastrophizing things? But then, because that's what it would be like, years ago when I was having those thoughts. But to actually it be real and everyone be in that same position, yeah, it was, yeah,
So it's kind of that we, in a sense, we were, because I was just as you were saying it, Marsha, I was thinking, well, I was thinking the same things. I was thinking the world would come to an end. I was, but for me, it didn't trigger necessarily a past of, that these were the thoughts that I used to have when I was having a bad day, a bad mental health day. But it must be really bad when that trigger takes you back to a really bad place, and you don't want to go back to that. That sounds really difficult. anyway, I asked you for 3 things, so you just gave me 2. Give me a third.
The other scary thing was when the vaccination was coming out and people with my diagnosis or my borderline personality disorder, the JS, that acronym, didn't recognize it as severe enduring mental illness and that. And that was really scary. But the Centre for Mental Health and Equally Well and Rethink were in touch with NHS England and that. And so that was scary then, but then in the work that I'm involved in, the projects I'm involved in, I knew that there was organizations behind the scene, trying to do something about it. But I was really mindful that other people that saw those things on the news and that, each day, every day, there was no let up. Imagine how that must have made them feel, abandoned, rejected. And so, yeah, those are my 3.
Yeah.
And
I mean, the last one, I really resonate with, because you kind of resonated with the people who were exposed to that, and how awful it must be for them. And I have to say that that is just, people sometimes think that we over-identify with people and we have kind of empathic distress sort of thing, but it's just so real. That is just such a real thing. Anyway,
what was your 3 things?
I was just about to say, the third one of yours was one of mine, certainly. I had a kind of helplessness thing as well, that all these people that are, I call my conversational partners, people I talk to regularly, who I feel I can, support, also support me, because they make me feel good, I'm doing something useful. My wife, I'm not so sure that she's convinced of, but anyway, so, but I kind of had a sense of helplessness about it that I find kind of oppressive, that here was something that I could see that they were experiencing and I could do nothing about it. That was terrible. And then, and then extended to my family, and then perhaps the most awful part of it for me was my daughter getting COVID. And she's a paramedic, so it was going to happen. And my wife works in the front line. I was fine. My wife is a doctor, but she works in the front line, and I was really frightened for them. I say I was frightened for them, but really I'm frightened. When I say I'm frightened for them, I'm frightened for myself. Being without them, if you see what I mean. When something happens, I'm absolutely useless. So if something happened either to my wife or to my daughter, I wouldn't know what to do, because usually I would turn to either of them to see if there's something terrible happened. I would say to either of them, something terrible happened. Will you do something about it, please? But if something happens to them, who would I turn to? So there was a sense of the same kind of helplessness. I would say is probably that's the worst part of it.
I'm sorry to hear about your daughter getting COVID. I didn't know, but I did know from our conversations about them both being on the front line. And one of the things that I hope you don't mind me mentioning as well is when everything was going on at the beginning, you had to think about your students at UCL as well. And yeah, how was that?
I mean, it was difficult. I run a very large division with about 2,300 students, so it's the numbers are big. And just knowing that each student was scattered all around the world, literally, and not necessarily in the places where they wanted to be. Knowing that the support structure that we were able to provide within the university for them just kind of from one day to the next disappeared. And how to kind of try to recreate that. But also the staff, because, academics, I know people think that we have a really easy life, and to be honest, I think that's true. But, at that time, a lot of my colleagues are women with children who had to continue the responsibility to provide online teaching at the same time as looking after their kids. My heart went out to them. And I started writing, which I don't usually do. I mean, I'm a head of division, but I don't usually impose myself on anybody. But I started writing regular letters to the whole staff, saying, pretty vacuous, really, because I was not able to do very much, but just showing that I knew that I understood the difficulties that they were in. And, I think that it's just so important. If you just know that there is somebody who is knows that things are bad, that things are difficult, it just makes such a difference. What did you find that anything made any of the things that you mentioned better? That who is coming through the door, the thinking about all the other people out there, and the vaccination.
My son was living at home at the time, and he was doing Michelin star meals. It was unbelievable. It really was. And he'd gone from not having any enjoyment in cooking or anything to, wow, I'll have to show you pictures sometime. It was like, wow. And then there was the fact that I thought I'd lost my identity when it first happened, but then things went virtual. My always thing that always lifted me up was getting on the train to London and coming and sort of meeting people that I know, with the various projects that I am involved in. So for all that to stop, but then it meant that that I could have conversations with people and were involved in so many things. So there was that was some of the negative, but the positive was that I started feeling confident in myself in that. So yeah, there was that. And then
just hold a second. So that you were involved in that you could be involved in something that you felt was meaningful, that actually helped with the anxiety, the feeling that you were kind of a bit lost and a bit isolated, and there's just such an important lesson there. So kind of a positive engagement with things. Yeah, sorry, I stopped you. Yeah, tell me more. Give me more advice.
No, so I guess Be Well is one of these projects that sort of I heard about, and we're now having this brain reaction interview, brain interaction. I'm rubbish. So we're having this talk really, and I guess the Be Well stuff is for young people. It's a well-being survey, and to hopefully capture some of the not so good stuff that they've been experiencing over the last 18 to 24 months. And it's vital. And I guess you, as being chief exec of the Anna Freud Center, who's in collaboration with the Be Well thing, I guess, can you tell me why gathering this research is so important at this minute in time?
But, it's important that we understand fully what has happened to people, that we understand deeply. I've been surveyed out. I've answered more surveys during the last 18 months, 2 years than the rest of my life put together. And that's quite a few decades. I have to, I'm not going to say how many, but it is not, it's a significant number. But it's really understanding what's behind that tick. When people say, I'm not feeling as good as I used to, that I'm really feeling it's tough. Two aspects of it for me, Marsha. One is that we need to recognize when people have it tough, and we need to respect that. And we need recognition of it for ourselves, that life is tough. And it doesn't mean that just empathy. It doesn't mean you got to do something about it, but it does mean that there got to be somebody who perceives it, who actually understands it, and who can respond in a way that shows that they understand. That makes such a difference. And I have a word for that. And the word for that I use is kindness. And it's just being kind. And I think if we can be kind to each other, we can make each other's lives so much better. But the second part of it is that we all have found our little solutions to things. And if we can share those solutions, we achieve two things. First, we might actually be useful to somebody else in that conversation and suggest something that they hadn't thought of. But secondly, by seeing that we have said something that's useful, we can do what I think you pointed to as well, Marsha, which is we can feel that we're doing something that's meaningful. Because you were saying to me that getting involved in all those endless Zoom discussions that you and I had been involved in different contexts with different people, some of them incredibly irritating, some of them incredibly nice and really inspiring. Some of them, I could have turned off, like the Saturday afternoon TV, but some of them were, really valuable. That in all those conversations, there was something else. We were meaningfully engaged in something. And that in itself, I think, it's feeling that we've lost meaning through these terrible things happening, that we don't recognize how terrible it is, and how terrible it is in different ways to all of us. But also, we don't help each other to find meaning that there can be beyond it. to me, that's really what these conversations should be about. And I really hope that they were. I don't know. What do you think? Reflect to me a little bit. How does this conversation feel?
Well, it feels good. There was the Be Well Young People's group last night, planning group, and I told them about us having this conversation today, and asked them, what I should talk about, or from them. And this one young person said that she'd been involved in various campaigning and awareness things for 7 years. But she herself felt that this Be Well survey is really special, and she feels that usually a lot of the time people aren't listening, but with this Be Well survey, she feels optimistic. And I guess for me, what I would love for all, is we would be able to validate some of the very real distress that people will have experienced over the time, instead of just being dismissive. We could also hopefully, and this is something that you are always thinking about, and so am I, is about early intervention. And I'm hoping, really, really hope that we can break that cycle, and that's for me what I want this project, this Be Well movement to be about. What do you think?
Well, I think I couldn't agree with you more, Marsha. If we can, the Be Well movement can just start conversations where people feel that they've been listened to. That would be just so good, even kind of in a kind of micro way. It doesn't have to be many conversations, but if kind of cascaded a little bit, and we learn something, but through learning, we can make people feel they're making a meaningful contribution that might make them feel better, and can be part of somewhere where they can feel a little bit understood, and learn about how you can understand people too. I'd be just so pleased.
Pleased for what?
Yeah.
I know we're going to wrap up in a second. What has given you room for optimism over the last few months? For me, it was going to London for a few days. It was, at first I was really scared, remember having that internal bun fight in my head. But then I went, and it was so nice, and that it was just really, really nice. What about you? What's lifted you up in that?
Well, I don't know, but I can. There are several things, but the one thing that gives me a kind of sense of optimism about my own life is being able to be here, feeling that I'm doing the job that I should be doing. And I'm incredibly privileged to be working with two organizations, UCL and Anna Freud, that have helped me personally. I was a patient at the Anna Freud. I was accepted by UCL, where all the other universities have rejected me. So I have two organizations that I have worked for all my life, that I am actually able to be there for at a time of crisis. And that's an incredible privilege, I feel. It's, I probably am messing it up, and probably everybody else around me thinks, just get the guy out of here, but from maybe in a slightly selfish way, what's giving me that is that I feel there's a job to do. I feel there is something that to deal with, and much like you coming to London, you were scared. There was a challenge. You went into the challenge. You conquered it, and what's more, there were positive outcomes. You gave a superb talk. Everybody loved it. You did it on your own without any support. Gave you confidence. Had tremendous feedback. It's, you courageously went into a situation that you were scared of. It's a wonderful outcome.
Well, I received some tools called mentalization-based therapy tools that help me understand some of that it was created by some really amazing, intelligent person. And so I know we need to go in a second, but I just wanted to ask the one thing. During COVID, I was so lonely. I'm wondering how it was for you, because you're always out and about and everything, and with your family, sort of being on the front line and everything. I guess the reason I'm asking is because we're talking about the children, but I also want the parents to also, validate some of how they felt, and also the teachers. And that was why I asked, your initial question about, how was it for the students? So am I okay to ask how? Yeah.
I mean, how was it for me?
Yeah.
It was incredibly tiring. And it made me feel, certainly the first few months, I kind of made me feel that maybe, I'm past it and I'm too old and I should move on. But so it made me feel sad. I didn't feel lonely, but I was kind of scheduled. Every moment of my day was scheduled, and I was working from home. And I remember I took this routine of putting my tie on and my jacket on, even though I was working from home. And everybody else I was working on, they were all in their t-shirts. And they said, "Why are you wearing your tie? You're at home." So yeah, but when I'm finished, the day I can take my tie off, and then I know that's just the end of the day. And those little routines helped a little bit. But if I give any impression, Marsha, that I wasn't lost, that I wasn't completely, totally turned upside down by it all, then I didn't convey accurately what I felt. It was bad. I don't want that time again. And I think I'll be better able to cope with it now, second time round if it comes. But it was not a happy time. And as I described, part of the unhappiness was just knowing how difficult it was for the young people that I was working with, and also the staff that I had to look after. So, it's good that we had this conversation. Actually, it made me quite happy to be able to think about all that time being behind me rather than me having to live through it all again. Anyway, Marsha, thank you so much for chatting with me. As ever, it's such a clever way that you have of making me feel at ease. Don't know how you do it, but usually I'm incredibly socially anxious, but you never make me feel that. So thank you.